Who we are in a relationship is something that we ourselves define, and uh, it's the sum of the amount of empathy that we used towards the other person or towards the context of the situation. I guess the other way of phrasing this is either being submissive or being dominant, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that. What I see it as is how much empathy we portray and where that empathy stems from. And that gets to define a large portion of our relationships and all sorts of relations that we have, from owner to pet to siblings to partners to parents and children to politicians, interactions you have in the social context, etc. How much empathy you portray really means how much of yourself you're opening up to the situation, and how much you're allowing other people to not only approach you, but to approach beyond your borders, the borders of your integrity. And that, once they start breaching that, is the point of which you portray too much empathy. And why is that problematic? It's problematic because of many reasons. Those reasons are mainly because you are harming yourself with that dynamic, but you're also harming the other person. In the context of a relationship, how much empathy you portrayed, for example, in the managing of the household. Let's say that you always took on yourself to not only make the lunch, but also clean afterwards. If that is something that is very subconscious, something that you just allow to happen, and you never raised your concern about it, over time it becomes very difficult to talk about such a topic. It is a very simplistic example, but it's just to portray the dynamic that happens, or the sort of enclosed dynamic that gets to define that relationship. So in that instance, let's say you were the person who always cleans up after the lunch that you also made. Let's say that that is something that happens throughout 2 years of you being with that person, that dynamic happens with. Let's say that you simply get too tired of that dynamic and you say to yourself, this is not something I can do any longer. In a healthy context, the other person should say, okay, let's try and compensate in a way that you are no longer burdened to the point where you are being exhausted. But what usually happens is the other person starts feeling entitled to the context that has been established, and then they start feeling wronged. And then the question that appears is, who is in the wrong? The one who allowed this dynamic to happen, or the one who agreed to the dynamic, even though it seemed impossible or unlikely that one person can carry this throughout? Of course, many things play into this. There's expectations based on gender, based on social status, based on many different things. But that's why this discussion is so complex, is because there's a lot of people suffering because of the amount of empathy they showed. And this empathy, after it reaches a certain point of no return, after you start portraying too much of it, becomes a sort of pathology, because no human is doing something without it having some sort of benefit towards them. And what's then those people who are portraying too much empathy start doing is they start manipulating with their empathy. They start portraying empathy, but in a way that is eventually damaging to the other person. They start handicapping the other person. So the other person not only isn't making lunch, they cannot make dinner or lunch. They cannot deal with food. They are completely handicapped in that context, in let's say that context. There's plethora of ways in which empathy can be destructive. And that's why you need to ask yourself, how much can I allow in what period of time? So that is, for example, when it comes to long-term relations or relationships. But what do you do, for example, in a social context where you start noticing that people assume they can do too much. For example, they start picking on you, and they start making jokes that really breach your integrity and jokes that you're not very comfortable with. Being self-reflective and being able to laugh or even ignore, but not comment on somebody doing those things, you can say that is a sign of maturity, and it's a sign of a healthy ego. But it is not a sign of a healthy ego if somebody's literally stomping on you for days on end, or any time you meet them, and you just sort of ride along. At a certain point you have to draw a line and say no. But how do you do that in a tasteful way? That is really up to the context and up to the situation. But it is necessary to recognize that you need to be at the peace with yourself. You need to find a way to reaffirm your value. You need to find a way to reaffirm your being in the world and your continual being in the world, with all the changes that happen, that you are a person in development, in change, that you will always strive to be better. This is something that you need to reconcile with yourself. And if you are doing those things, if you are a person that is relatively aware of themselves and their presence, when these things happen, there should be a natural response to just dismiss whatever the other person is trying to do. Sometimes, I believe, that reaction can have a hint of aggression in it. It can have a hint of a raised voice. It can have a hint of irony, of sarcasm, of biting, of spite. But it has to be something that will effectively say no to that person. And of course, there's always the good old distancing. Just sort of say, we live in a civilized world. This is the border. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Please respect that. But those, of course, are the extreme situations. But those, again, might be necessary, all of those that I mentioned, because people are very used to breaching rules, breaching borders of integrity. And unfortunately, as soon as they see that somebody is portraying emotion, that somebody is portraying the capability, the capacity to understand them and all the other people, they just abuse it. They can't help themselves. It's almost as if they're emotional vampires. They just have to latch onto that little purpose, that little beauty that they saw, and completely devour it. And unless you learn how to draw borders, this will affect you. And until you learn how to properly draw the borders of your integrity to other people, this will keep happening. But at one point, you will have to do this. If you are a healthy, true to yourself person, you will have to do this, because you will just not manage to do anything in life, and you will not get by, not much, not far, if you don't do this. So listen to the healthy tendency in yourself and find a way to define the borders, because otherwise these other people who are just reckless when it comes to other people's integrities will eat up your soul, will eat you alive if they get the chance to. And this is something that is relevant for all sorts of relations. It's relevant when it comes to the relation between you and your pet, between siblings, between all sorts of different things. In the example of the pet, for example, I have a cat, and our cat was used to getting inside a lot, and we allowed her to be inside. But at a certain point, we realized that because of the dynamic of our lives, they will not be able to be inside every time there's a danger outside. And it's just not a realistic thing. We cannot be there. We cannot find somebody to be there. It's not something that we can afford. And it's not something that a cat has to be adjusted or accommodated for. And then you ask yourself, am I really being empathic towards the cat because I'm letting her inside every time she's feeling warm outside? Or am I being unjust to her because I'm showing to her, or I am allowing her to do things which I cannot accommodate for long term? And of course, a cat is not a reasonable being. I mean, it is a pretty clever and cunning being, but it's not a reasonable being. So at a certain point, when you stop allowing her to get inside, she will start making a noise, making a mess. She will start retorting because you established a relation with her where every time she meows and wants to go inside, you let her in. So who is to blame there? Well, in this context, it's actually the owner. The cat is just adjusting itself to the thing you allow to happen. In the context of interpersonal relations, it's much more complicated, as I already explained. But there are methods in which you can make yourself established as safe and secure in social context, in a social context, and in the context of just being in the world. And it is something worth thinking about, and it is a topic worth exploring. How much empathy is necessary, how much empathy becomes damaging and destructive. Where do we place empathy in such a way that it is beneficial for the people we love and for us long term?